Hello and welcome back to Read This. On yesterday's podcast, I was talking to Michael Smith about the alliterative Morte Arthur, and today's episode is an extended interview with Michael, where I ask him more specifically about his work as a translator, his printmaking, and where he got started with all of this medieval poetry and Arthurian business. If you'd like to see or purchase any of Michael's prints, or his book of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, or if you'd like to pledge towards his upcoming publication of the alliterative Morte Arthur, which I think you still have 3 days to do, for all of the above, visit www.mythicalbritain.co.uk. A huge thank you once again to Michael. It was a real delight talking to him, and I hope you enjoy the episode. When did you first sort of get into, medieval literature, but also translation?
Well, the story is rather banal and not greatly interesting, and sometimes I wonder why I ever started out on this journey. But I mean, my background, as you probably know, I'm read history, so I'm a historian by nature. But I always had an interest in, I suppose Shakespearean English, or just the English language and what you can do with it from a musical point of view. And I wouldn't call myself a poet, but I just like to play with flow. Anyway, that sort of has lain dormant for many years as I was compelled to follow a career. But in recent years, I trained to become a printmaker because it's one of my other interests. And then one day I did these images of Gawain and the Green Knight, and I thought, I'm going to make some greetings cards and put some messages inside, the translated sections. And then I thought, there'll be a copyright issue here. So the story begins.
Do it yourself.
That took me 5 years.
Wow.
Because I had absolutely zero knowledge. And after I got through Gawain the first time round, and I was having a beer with a friend of mine by Lake Coniston. And he said, I said, really, it's a fascinating poem, that, Mike. He said, it changes tense the whole time, doesn't it? And I said, yeah, that's right. And in my head, I said,
what?
Does it? So I went back and bloody hell. So I had to go back to the beginning, start again. And then I went back again because I wanted to work on the alliteration. And I think I went through it 3 or 4 times prior to when it eventually got published, when I had to go through it one more time at proof stage. Even now, I'm not greatly satisfied with it, although I still like it as a piece of work. So that's how the story started, and right. Then the Arthur one was sort of built on that, really, with the lessons I learned through Gawain. And so now I have my method, and it works really well for me now. But God, it's painful at the time.
So, but the printmaking came first.
It did.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And what brought you brought you to that?
I was talking to a friend of mine one day, and she said, "You'd be good at printmaking." So she said, "Why don't you book yourself onto this course?" So I did, which is at the Curwen Print Study Centre near Cambridge, and I met some friends there, and gradually my technique started to improve. And what those courses do, they help you to find out which method suits you best, and almost like doing an apprenticeship, if you like, in the old days style of working out skills. And so I ended up finishing on lino-cut, and so that's how that developed. And I mean, the trouble with all of this, so you see the final illustrations in Gawain and so on, the pain involved in creating each of those, the thumb work, the endless nights on your own listening to music, cutting these gouges. It's everyone else has gone to bed, and you're working on Guinevere's eyebrow or whatever it is. Why am I doing this? What is the point? But it's, as any artist will tell you, when you've finished a piece of work, they're not interested in it. You move on to the next one, and so you can't sit still when you're creating things. And so that's why I have to keep going with that as well, because I know I can do better. And every time you look at a piece of work, you think, well, that's not very good. Yeah.
If it's not too painful, would you be able to describe the process of the lino-cut for us?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you start with a piece of lino or some other forgiving material which will take ink. I tend to use a kind of a tile, rubberized tile, which is similar to lino. And then you have a range of cutting tools. And I will draw out loosely whatever image I want to create on the tile. And then I will start to work it. And when you're doing lino or relief printing, what you don't cut away is what ends up being printed, if you can imagine that. So you're working in reverse. Everything you cut will not be printed. So therefore, the white space has to serve two purposes. One is to create spaces between the things that are going to appear, and the other is to define the objects and make them what they are on the page. Now, it gets more complicated than that, because in some instances you may have seen, or if you look at the back of Gawain as a classic case there, that print in reality of the Green Knight is 12 inches square and comprises of 3 plates of ink. So there's blue, green, and yellow, and so you have to cut them you register them so they all match with each other, and you cut different parts away from each so that together they sing a 3 or 4 color song. And if you look at some of my 4 color prints, like the one I've done recently for King Arthur, I think out of 4 plates, through careful cutting and thinking backwards with each plate, I think there might be 7 or even 9 colors emerging from those 4 plates. Wow. As you print each layer on top of the other.
So it sounds like for Gawain, you started in these sort of translating short sections before you tackled the whole thing after you'd done the
Yes.
prints. With this latest one, is there a kind of toing and froing between the prints and the translation? Do they inform each other or help each other at all?
Oh God, I tell you what, actually, this one was really difficult. With literature Morte Arthur. When I first started the project, I wanted to illustrate it with pen and ink line drawings in the style of a medieval manuscript. And as I started to go through that style that we talked about, the graphic style and all this, I suddenly thought, no, this isn't what's needed here. And I was in real difficulty. I don't know what to do. I can't illustrate this. I'm not getting the feeling. There's no voice in the work. And then I was in Swansea, 2 or 3 years ago. There was some kind of Dylan Thomas prize or something. I don't know what it was. And we went around this gallery, and there was an exhibition of Kata Kolowitz's work, who is was an incredibly bleak German printmaker. Some of her images are really graphic, as a woman has been raped. There's another one of just people suffering, working people, oppressed people. And I looked at these and I thought, that's it. That's what I've got to do. So the style of the illustrations for King Arthur are drawn from the heart-rendering feeling in Kata Kolowitz's work. So some of the images used in King Arthur that I've used are similar to the Gawain ones, that sort of naive lino-cut style. But I wanted to contrast those with the Kata Kolowitz ones, so that, because I think the poet's intention was to distinguish between the chivalry and the horrors of war. So you've got these two things coming across with the illuminations. But for a while, probably for 6-8 months, I was floundering with how to illustrate this work, and it almost didn't move forward because I didn't know where I was going to go with it, and then I found the voice.
Wow. And what, I mean, perhaps our whole conversation could serve as an answer to this, but what made you pick alliterative Arthur as your next project, as opposed to, another work of Arthurian literature or just another poem?
I was asked by Unbound publisher, have you got any more books up your sleeve? And I said, well, I suppose there's this. And they said, yeah, let's do it. So I said, oh, okay. And then it all started from nothing. So I think because with Unbound with Gawain, I was some way down the track with that by that time. I'd done all the various revisions. I'd had illustrations. Everything was ready. This I had to start absolutely from scratch, which was quite a tricky thing to do. So all the while I was thinking translation, how am I going to illustrate this? How am I going to get, I don't know yet this poem well enough yet. But it was good discipline. It made me learn fast and also made me think about, future ones.
And have you picked up any tricks with alliterative verse? I was thinking in particular, like, it must be so hard to, I mean, I don't know whether you sort of do it chronologically or not, but to just find break points to go, like, I'm going to cover this bit.
I try that. And sometimes, I mean, what's really strange is sometimes a piece will go really, really well. You'll move very quickly, and then you'll come along to 3 lines. And I can't make sense of this. Yeah. Because I know what it's trying to say. And I think, but I've got to say it in the way that the language, that the meter that I've created will say it. And sometimes I walk away. And so for a time, I think it was one time I spent something like 40 minutes on 3 lines and I just left it. I walked away. Yeah. But another time, you'll find there's a section, you'll read a bit aloud. That sings, that really works. And the translation will just zip through and you can do 50 or even 100 lines in an afternoon, which is, when I say an afternoon, that's probably about 3 hours.
Wow.
So it's still a long time to do that translation, but it's so that gives you a flavour, doesn't it? 4,500 lines of literature of Morte Arthur, divide by 100 for, say, a good afternoon, and that's a long time. That's just draft 1.
Yeah. Wow.
Plus the notes and all that other stuff. But so are there any techniques? I mean, I think for me that what I like to do now is to read a piece aloud before I start the translating of it, and then read it again, and then that at least lets you drop in and understand where the breakpoints in the piece might be, and the flavour of it might occur.
Yeah, because it's such a breathless style. Like, the units of thought are sometimes quite hard to isolate from the units of rhythm, and there's the end sort of points in the lines. Sometimes you think, well, actually that's extra detail, but it scans so well that you include it.
Yes.
I can't imagine how difficult it is to start chopping all that up.
No, and of course, I mean, one of the things, of course, that the way I approach these translations, which makes it easier for me, is I choose to use, if the poet uses the word Burney or grieves or a glaive, I don't try and translate that into something else. I say what it is, because that's what it is, and then I put Burney and glaive and grieve in the glossary at the back, and so my work, as you'll have seen with Gawain, will always include a glossary of words and also some detailed notes, so people can find out more about things, or if there's an area for further thought. And so the alliterative Morte Arthur in this instance is got a comprehensive glossary and some really detailed notes. So that makes my life a little easier. So some of those tricky things that drop into the lines, which might cause another translator difficulty, don't cause them for me, because this is a medieval poem. These are medieval words.
Keep them.
They're understood today by military people. Therefore, it's legitimate to retain them and describe them.
In your introduction to Gawain, you very much praised the Gawain poet. I was wondering how, now that you've sort of got to know their writing style, how they compare the two, if you've picked on stylistic differences between them or little quirks.
I think the Gawain poet is is a class act.
Mm.
He's someone with an empathetic heart. He understands people really well. He understands women really well. I mean, okay, some people have argued that that poem is ostensibly misogynistic, and it could be interpreted as that. But you know, that's a good debate to have, a good discussion to have, because it's just one of its many layers. But the Gawain poet, he has such a real understanding for the spiritual nature of humanity and people and loneliness and the inner soul. I mean, he is, you know, when Gawain's out in those hills, about to face the Green Knight and the sharpening of that blade, and you're not really listening to the blade, you're thinking about what's going on in his head. You know, there's a real skill with that. Now, the Arthur poet, he's not interested in any of that. His style is much blunter. People don't really have feelings, except on a martial level.
Yeah.
With the exclusion of King Arthur, but King Arthur is shown. I don't think we really ever feel sorry for King Arthur in this poem. I don't think the poet is trying to make us feel that way.
Yeah.
We don't really enter Arthur's soul. We almost know it's going to happen to him because of the course of action he's taken. But the Gawain poet, wow, to meet him today, I mean, you know, do you know when we did the performance of Gawain and the Green Knight based on my translation a few years back, it was a bitterly cold winter. The night before the performance, the dress rehearsal, it was -5 inside the church. And on the day itself, I think it was -3, and all the audience were wrapped up and everything. And as I was walking to this empty church, I was walking to the church in the emptiness of the night with my friend Anne, who was one of the people that's helping me. All of a sudden, this owl suddenly hooted, and I said, "That's the Gawain poet." And she said to me, "I've never heard that owl here before." And so I thought, well, it certainly is then in
Definitely
that case. He's come back. Yeah, that's it. So I like to think he's some kind of spiritual character, rather than the Arthur poet, who is probably a little bit more coarse. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. There was a really interesting something you said in your introduction. I found really interesting, which was that there was a sense for the Gawain poet that he was pairing. His literary process involved pairing the idea, which was the matter of Britain, the Arthurian saga and business with kings, with sense, which was his style or his form of expression. And again, I mean, I'm increasingly thinking that we are always misled to be somewhat patronizing towards medieval writers and to think that they weren't as sophisticated as they are. But that again seems very modern, very sort of a kind of Augustan. Well, it makes me think of Alexander Pope and people like that pairing their genius with the subject. Is that something unique to the Gawain poet, or is that true of the medieval writers?
Don't know whether it's unique to him. I have to say I'm not well read enough on the medieval writers to be able to answer that question fully. I mean, it's certainly, yeah. I don't know. He says, "No, mate."
Well, I think I mean it certainly hangs true. Having read the alliterative of Arthur, that it's going on for him as well. Everything we've said today seems to back that up, and with Gawain as well.
Maybe I've misinterpreted your question. Yeah, phrase it in another way, Ash, and I'll answer it again.
Well, I suppose then what I mean is that there was a sense of a writer's style, an individual style, and that was valued enough for the practice to be about that, as opposed to I'm a hired writer and I will tell you the story you already know quite well.
Gotcha. I think they did have individual styles, and you can as you say, there are two distinct styles between the literature of Morte Arthur and the Gawain poet. If you read, I suppose, now I haven't read Piers Plowman in Middle English, so I don't know about this. But so the translation I've read of it it's a bit iffy. But clearly he has a view and he has a style of his own, and a very distinctive style. And I love his description of all these people in the Severn Valley wandering about. These people, it wasn't uniform practice of just some kind of poetic form. They were putting their own personality into these things. Certainly, many of them chose to remain anonymous. Whether William Langland indeed is William Langland, whether he actually or is somebody else, is another matter. But yeah, there is a distinct style, definitely, and of each of them. And William of Palerne, he always says, "I tell you truly, I'll tell you this, I'll tell you that." So they're in there. Yeah, their voice comes out. They're not trying to conform to some greater structure.
Yeah.
They are free individuals writing.
Oh, it's so interesting. I think for non-Arthurians, the story of Arthur and the connected stories are almost a little bit intangible, and that everyone's kind of got their own, and the actual the key writers and the key texts are maybe a little bit lost within Arthurian literature. Where does the alliterative Arthur sort of stand, do you think, or perhaps where should it?
I'm not sure it even has a place in it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's really weird, but it's sort of like it's like an offshoot somewhere. It's like a branch of a tree that's not grown any leaves, or it's snapped off somehow, and it's just dangling from the trunk. It's not romance.
Yeah.
It doesn't really enhance any part of the greater story. I would see it perhaps more as a playing around with a bit of Geoffrey of Monmouth and doing it for its own reasons. And it may account for the fact why it's not as well known as it should be. But I think, in my view, it should be read not because it's an Arthurian story, but for what it says. And because, as I said earlier, you think of the Trumps of this world. This is a book for them. It just shows that all this unthoughtful, selfish nonsense will bring only ruin for everybody. And in the case of King Arthur, of course, he turns his country against himself. He loses his wife to Mordred. And he ends up being slain by his own sword of state. That is the lesson of this poem, and it's why I think it's so relevant to today. Life is not, or nation kingship is not about simple columnar ways of doing things. It's a broad, multi-leveled capability. And you either have it or you don't. And I think many of today's leaders, frankly, they haven't got a clue.
Well, I would love to see Donald Trump made to read this.
I'd love to see him suffer the same outcome as well.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
But without any of the pathos.
Yeah.
I think, and many people would be glad to see him gone. But, yeah. But,
can I ask where and when did you learn Middle English? Because you speak it in your videos. I was going to ask if it's not putting you on the spot, if you would mind giving us a taste, because it was fascinating to listen to.
Well, I will say, for the benefit of your listeners, that don't listen to me reading and thinking this is the real thing. There are people out there who know exactly what this is all about. And who will probably listen to me reading and thinking, "Oh my God, what a charlatan!" However, what I say is this: if you like to read something and you enjoy it, and it's like going to going to buy a record player from a really high quality record player shop, they say to you, it's not about how much money you've got to spend, it's about what you like to hear. And we'll build a record player to suit you. And I say that with writing, with reading. You read it how you like. So how did I learn it? Well, I didn't learn it. I just sort of picked up from listening to people as I've gone along, and then found my own way of reading this aloud, which I enjoy. And of course, because I have a sort of North Country accent, it suits some of the pronunciations of these words really well. So I get a lot of pleasure in speaking those harsher vowels and stuff like that. And I'm glad you like it, but I'm not claiming any authenticity. But I'm happy to read some aloud if you would like that.
I'd love it. Perhaps it is Northern kinship then.
Okay, so there's a passage here from the alliterative Morte Arthur. Now, this is the section where so Arthur has returned to England, and he's defeated Mordred's fleet off of the south of England, and Gawain has landed early with 70 people and has taken on Mordred's army. And unfortunately, at the end, despite killing, in the way of these things, thousands of people, he's encircled, and ultimately his people must face what's coming to them. He's completely outnumbered. And then he spots, amongst these people circling him, Sir Gawain spots Sir Mordred. And this is where Gawain meets his end. Then he moves to Sir Mordred among all his connectors, and met him in the middenshield, and malice him so. But the shalker for the sharp he shone a little. He shared him under shorty ribs, a shaft him under large. The shafter shuddered and shot in the sheer bearing, that the shed and the blood over his shank rinnis, and showed on the shinda border that was sheer burnest. And so they shift and shove. He shot to the earth. With the lush of the lance, he licked on his shoulders, and a acre length on a lawn, full loathly wounded. Then Gawain girded to the gome, and on the gruff follies. All his grief was graithed, his grace was no better. He shook us out a short canifer, sheathed with silver, and should have slotted him in, but no slit happened. His hand slipped and sewed or slunt on the mailers, and the t'other slayly slingers him under. With a trenchant canifer, the traitor him hitters, thorough the helm and the head, on high on the brain. And thus Sir Gawain is gone, the good man of arms, without an rescue of rancour, and Ruther is the more. Thus Sir Gawain is gone, that gaed many other, fro Gower to Guernesey, all the great lordies of Glamour, of Gallis Londa, these Galliard connectors, for glent of Glopinning, glad be they never.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. That was fantastic.
Well, I hope whoever wrote it is listening up there with approval.
It's fascinating because it we were talking earlier about there being no common tongue. I thought this listening to your video. It kind of there's moments where it sounds like a Welsh word. There's moments that sound very northern.
Yes.
It's a fantastic sort of mix. And I was trying to just not think about where you were in the poem and try and just hear each sound as it comes, and you really do get a emotive sense for it, even if you can't immediately sort of translate word for word. And then you get a chunk that you can, and it sort of pieces
yes, that's
together.
right. They sort of come out, don't they? It's,
yeah.
I remember being on a train years ago going to London, and there was these two girls talking Portuguese. And then all of a sudden it says, and then we'll go to John Lewis, and then they carry on in Portuguese.
Everyone must have had an experience like that. That is what it's like. It's that snapshot of that's an English noun randomly in
that's
Arabic
right.
or something.
Yes, that's it. And it's a little bit like that with this. I mean, some of the words are the same. They're spelt differently, like brain,
Mm.
Brayne. But yeah, so they bits and pieces leap out, but you're right. And when you say it sounds like bits of Welsh and whatever, I mean the point is with the it's like saying, when did the Iron Age end?
Mm.
Um, or when did the Bronze Age begin? Where is the end to the West Midlands and the East Midlands dialect? One of the pleasures I have is, if I'm in the North Country, I'll just listen to people talking and work out where they're from, and I'll slowly but surely tick off different towns and come down to a locality, because people pronounce very small, that people in one area have very small differences which enable you to place them at the back end of Warrington
Mm.
or the other side of Altrincham.
Yep.
It's just like that, really. Yeah, and so that's what it's like with this. So in Gawain, for example, the word yow, I mean, that for me, that's it's like a Yorkshire, yo and yo,
Yeah.
and that's not. Whereas yo is not really a way that Lancashire people speak, or Cheshire people. That'd be you. But but years ago, I think which comic was it? The Topper or the Beano? There was one of these patronising northern characters called Ebagoom, and that was the name of the character, and it was E and then BA and then GOOM. Now, no one I know says bagoom.
Mm.
They say by gum,
By
but
gum.
they don't say by goom.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always some southern so and so thinking you spell gum
Yeah.
with two O's.
If you're going to be patronising, get it right.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
or just go away.
Yeah, or just don't. Oh, well, Mike,
Yeah.
this has been so... I realise I've taken up an enormous amount of your time now. It's been about over an hour and a half.
Not at all. It's been really enjoyable.
Yeah, I've absolutely loved it. I want to talk about where people can get your book and your upcoming book. But just before we get to that, sorry to put you on the spot again, but I'm trying to make a kind of tradition with guests to ask them...
Do it.
to if they can recommend a sort of a further reading book, if you like. So not one of the key texts we've been mentioning, like Gawain and the alliterative Arthur, unless there's a very particular version. But maybe a book of historical fiction that's assisted or just been very enjoyable to read, that's connected to the period, or maybe a book of straightforward research or poetry or anything like that.
Gee whiz!
Like I say, sorry to put you on the spot.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm not the world's greatest fiction reader. So now, now let me think. I mean, there's a Yale book biography by Saul. I think it's Richard Saul on. Or maybe not with Richard Saul. His surname is Saul. On Richard II, a very readable biography of Richard II, and that's and very authoritative as well. The reason I suggest it is because for me, the translating of these poems, it's about putting them in their historical context, and I think a lot of these poems are particularly relate to the time of Richard II, and also because he's this sort of slightly fey king. Shakespeare portrays him as such. Of course, he was a boy king. He was a tyrant to the tail end. So quite a complicated character. And if you see him as sort of almost like a kingly metaphor for these poems, then Saul's book on Richard II is well worth reading.
Brilliant. Well, I'm sold. I'm going to check that one out, definitely.
I just can't remember his first name. Richard David. It's not David Soul. That's Starsky and Hutch, isn't it?
What a career move.
Yeah, you'd never thought it, would you?
Yeah. I think with Yale, I'll be able to find it, and I'll pop it in the description for people to find once I track it down. So. Along with, of course, the links where people can find your books. Now, Gawain is already out, but currently sold out. Is that right?
It's sold out. Yes, it's. I love the way that Amazon just said. Amazon says it's currently unavailable, but it is available, but only through me. So I have stock of the book. I've got two versions actually: the standard copy, or when we produced the first run with Unbound, there's a small set of deluxe copies which have bound in bookmarks, and on the particularly nice feature, if you take off the book jacket, there is an embossed Gawain star on the boards, which is not on the standard edition. So you can buy the standard edition in Kindle, but and it's available on Amazon. But I just don't think you'll get any pleasure reading this book with its illustrations in a Kindle format. I mean, that's up to the customer, of course, but for me, the pleasure of a book with illustrations and of this type is to hold it in your hand. And,
well, I got the Kindle version and read your introduction and notes, but I wonder if...
having just slagged it off, yeah.
Well, no, it sold me on wanting to get a physical version, because you're right.
Okay.
I want to see those illustrations close up, and so I'll be signing up for one. So people need to go onto your website for that.
They do, yes. Yeah. Mythical Britain, www.mythicalbritain.co.uk, and there's a shop there. And there's also all my prints on there as well, but that's by the by. But the books are all available through me, and if you're in the UK, I send them first class, post free. So so it's just as good as Amazon, except I sign your copy for you and dedicate it as well.
Great. Well, and also people can, now I'm hoping this is going to come out on Friday the 26th. I have an awful track record of saying something like that on this podcast and it coming out months later, but I'm determined to stick to this one.
Okay.
Well, actually, this particular episode will maybe come out on the 27th, but our main conversation will come out on the 26th, and that will have all the same information in. But if you're listening to this on the 27th, then you've still got, is it 3 days, Mike?
3 days, yes. So with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, I published the books through Unbound, who are a crowdfunding publisher, and people who pledge for their copy before the cutoff date have their name printed in the back as a patron. And the cutoff date for the alliterative Morte Arthur, King Arthur's death, is the 30th of June. So it's a tight squeeze. But if you fancy supporting the book and having your name in the back, then please pledge before the 30th. But it's available after that date as well. The actual book publishes in February 2021. But I believe that if you pledge for the book, your copies will arrive possibly before Christmas. But I hope that's the case. But either way, you'll get them much earlier than those who buy through the trade later on when it's actually released.
Brilliant. Well, Mike, thank you so much for today. It's been so much fun.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, Ash. Yes, thank you. I mean, it's quite a grilling you've given me there, actually, which is...
Oh, sorry to put you through that.